Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. In the quiet embrace of the night, as the world slows and the stars awaken, let your mind drift to a realm of ancient towers and forgotten secrets. Tonight, we journey to the lands of Middle-earth, where shadows of the past still whisper and the light of wisdom guides the way. Close your eyes, let the weight of the day fade, and step into a tale of mystery and wonder, a story of Gandalf the White, who walks once more among the ruins of Orthanc, uncovering secrets long buried beneath stone and time. Breathe deeply, let the words carry you, and surrender to the gentle pull of adventure. The night is long, but the light endures. And so, our story begins. The road to Isengard had changed. Once a barren land of metal and stone, where Saruman's machines had devoured the earth, now it was returning to life. The great flood unleashed by the Ents had washed away much of the corruption, and green shoots had begun to push through the soil. Trees swayed gently in the wind, their roots reclaiming what had once been theirs. But amidst this renewal, one thing remained untouched by the passage of time: Orthanc, the dark tower of Isengard, still standing tall and lifeless, its polished black stone reflecting the dim light of the evening sky. Gandalf sat upon Shadowfax, gazing up at the monolithic structure before him. Though the War of the Ring was over, though the Dark Lord was vanquished, and though Saruman had met his end far from here, something about the tower felt unfinished. There were whispers among the winds, echoes of something that refused to fade. A lingering presence clung to Orthanc like a shadow that refused to be cast away by the light. With a slow breath, Gandalf dismounted. His robes billowed slightly in the cool air as he approached the entrance. The great stone door stood firm, though cracks had begun to snake through its surface. Time had not been kind to the fortress. As he placed his hand against the cold stone, a shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from something else, something deeper. He knocked once with the base of his staff. The sound echoed through the empty valley, swallowed by the deep silence that hung over Isengard. Nothing stirred. Gandalf frowned. He had expected the Ents, or at least a few of the men left behind to guard the ruins, but the place seemed utterly abandoned. He had received word that the keys to Orthanc had been taken by King Elisar, locked away so that no one could enter the tower again. But Gandalf had no need for keys. He stepped back slightly, raising his staff. A soft glow emanated from its tip, illuminating the doorway. The air around him grew thick, charged with something unseen. He muttered a quiet incantation, weaving his power through the cracks of the stone, feeling the ancient magic that still bound the tower. Orthanc had been built in an age-long past, its foundation infused with enchantments that even the greatest of wizards could not easily undo. But Saruman's presence had weakened. His grip on this place was broken. With a sudden thrum of energy, the door began to shift. A low rumble filled the air as dust and debris crumbled from its edges. Then, slowly, impossibly, the door began to open. Gandalf stepped back, gripping his staff tightly as a gust of cold air rushed out from within. The air smelled of damp stone and decay, as if the very life had been drained from the halls inside. He narrowed his eyes. The door had opened too easily, as if it had been waiting for someone. He hesitated only a moment before stepping forward into the darkness. Inside, Orthanc was as he had last seen it, desolate, abandoned, and yet still carrying the weight of its past master. The grand chamber where Saruman once addressed his armies lay in ruins, the floor cracked and shattered from the battle that had taken place here. The remnants of broken furniture and scattered parchments littered the ground, their words long since faded. Gandalf moved carefully, his staff illuminating his path as he ascended the spiral staircase that wound up the tower. He could hear the faint whisper of the wind through the stone, but there was something else beneath it, something just beyond the edge of hearing. A presence, lingering, watching. Reaching the upper levels, he entered Saruman's private study. This was where the White Wizard had spent countless hours poring over his secrets, where he had communed with the Eye of Sauron, where he had plotted the downfall of Middle-earth. The room had been stripped bare when the Ents had ransacked the tower, yet Gandalf knew that Saruman had not left without hiding something. The old wizard had always been secretive, always planning beyond what others could see. His eyes swept across the room. The bookshelves stood empty, their contents either burned or taken. The great desk where Saruman had once sat was covered in dust, its surface scratched and marked from age. And yet, something was off. Gandalf walked forward, his boots stirring the dust. He placed his hand on the desk, feeling the rough wood beneath his fingertips. Then, with slow deliberation, he tapped his staff against the stone floor. The sound echoed unnaturally, slightly hollow. He narrowed his eyes. Kneeling, he ran his hand along the ground, feeling for imperfections. And then, there. A thin groove, almost invisible, forming a perfect square. He pressed against it, and with a soft click, a small section of the stone floor slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in tattered black cloth, lay a book. Gandalf hesitated only a moment before reaching for it. As his fingers brushed the cover, a cold sensation crept up his arm, as if something unseen was resisting him. He ignored it, lifting the book into the dim light. The cover was dark, worn with age, but unmistakable. Embossed upon it was a symbol he had hoped never to see again, the Eye of Sauron. A deep, quiet unease settled over him. This was no ordinary tome. This was not something Saruman had written himself. This was something far older. Something from the Dark Lord himself. Gandalf exhaled slowly, turning the book over in his hands. He could feel the presence within it, the weight of its history pressing against him. Yet this truly was a record of Sauron's knowledge, then it could hold secrets that even the wisest in Middle-earth had never uncovered. Secrets that could change the course of history. A soft sound broke the silence. A whisper, no, not a whisper, a sigh. Gandalf turned sharply, staff raised. But the room was empty. Only the dust moved in the dim light. He glanced down at the book. It was as still as before, yet he could not shake the feeling that something had changed the moment he had touched it. Carefully, he unwrapped the black cloth and opened the first page. The writing inside was ancient, the script flowing and elegant, yet filled with dark intent. As his eyes moved over the words, he felt the room grow colder. The shadows stretched just a little longer. And then, in the silence of Orthanc, a voice, distant and broken, whispered, "You should not have come here, Gandalf the White." The tower suddenly felt smaller, the darkness pressing on him. He was not alone. Gripping his staff tightly, Gandalf prepared himself. Whatever was waiting for him in the heart of Orthanc, it had been expecting him all along. A chill settled over the chamber as Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. The whisper that had slithered through the air was not merely an echo of the past, it was something aware, something present. The flickering light from his staff's glow barely seemed to touch the corners of the room, as though the darkness here was not merely an absence of light, but something alive, something watching. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. He had faced darker things than this: Balrogs, Nazgul, the Eye of Sauron itself. Yet there was something unnerving about this place, something unfinished. The book in his hands felt heavy, unnaturally so. The pages were thick, ancient, and bore writing in a language he recognized all too well. Black speech, the language of Mordor. Few in Middle-earth could read it, and fewer still dared. The words seemed to shift, writhing as if they did not wish to be understood by eyes that did not belong to the Dark Lord. He turned the first page, his fingers brushing against the rough parchment. The moment he did, a gust of air swept through the chamber, though there were no open windows, no cracks in the stone to let the wind in. His robes billowed slightly, and the candle stubs on the desk flickered violently before extinguishing themselves. A presence stirred. Gandalf straightened. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice steady. Silence. Then movement. A shadow, barely more than a smear of darkness against the black stone, twisted at the far end of the chamber. It had no form, no solid shape, but it was there. It clung to the edges of the room, just beyond the light, unwilling or unable to step closer. The whisper came again, no louder than a breath. "It was not meant for you, Istari." Gandalf's expression did not change, though his grip on his staff tightened. "And yet, here it is. Left behind, hidden beneath the very feet of your so-called servant. Did he betray you, Sauron?" His voice was calm, yet edged with quiet steel. The darkness recoiled slightly at the name, but it did not disappear. It only pulsed, as if alive, as if thinking. "Saruman was a fool," the voice murmured. "He thought himself greater than he was. But he was never the one meant to hold this knowledge." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Then who?" There was no answer. The air remained thick with unspoken things, with whispers of a time that had nearly been erased. He could feel something lingering beneath the surface of Orthanc, something that had been waiting for far too long. He looked down at the open book. The words stared back at him, dark and inked in a script that pulsed as if still breathing. He read carefully, his mind piecing together the meaning. It was not merely a record, it was a testament. A history, written by Sauron himself. Power is never truly lost. It lingers, buried in the bones of the earth, in the echoes of the past. To those who listen, to those who seek, it shall return. Gandalf's frown deepened. He turned another page. The text became denser, filled with incantations and descriptions of something referred to as Vathaduin. He did not recognize the term immediately, but the more he read, the clearer the implications became. It was not an object, not a place, it was a remnant. A remnant of the Dark Lord himself. Sauron had known that defeat was possible. Even as he poured his essence into the One Ring, even as he waged war across Middle-earth, he had prepared for the worst. There was a contingency, a way for his shadow to survive even if the ring was destroyed. Gandalf's pulse quickened. This was knowledge that should not exist. A sudden noise behind him. He turned sharply, his staff raised. The darkness in the far end of the room had moved. No, it was moving. It was no longer just a smear of shadow. It was taking shape. A vague, shifting form, as though a man stood just beyond a veil of smoke. It had no true face, yet Gandalf could feel its eyes. "You were never meant to see this," the thing rasped. Gandalf did not flinch. "I have seen far worse." The shadow seemed to tremble, then lurch forward, as if testing its limits. The moment it crossed into the circle of Gandalf's light, it hissed and recoiled, writhing like a wounded beast. It could not touch him, but it did not need to. The temperature in the room plummeted. The air thickened, pressing against Gandalf's chest. The walls seemed to stretch, the ceiling growing impossibly high as the shadows pulsed like a living heart. He had spent centuries in Middle-earth, had walked among elves and dwarves, had stood before Balrogs and waged battle against the darkness itself, but the presence in Orthanc was something different. It was not alive. It was a fragment. A memory left behind. But a memory of what? The book burned cold in his hands, as though it were drawing something from the very air around it. The words shimmered, pulsed, calling to the thing in the room. Gandalf knew what had to be done. He snapped the book shut. The moment he did, the entire tower shook. The walls groaned as dust rained from the ceiling, and the shadow shrieked, a sound that was both rage and pain. It lunged at him, desperate, clawing at the air, but it could not reach him. The book had bound it here, and now Gandalf had the key. He took a slow step back, then another, keeping his staff raised. The presence howled, swirling like a storm, but it could not leave the room. The very walls of Orthanc had been its prison, and for centuries it had remained undisturbed. Until now. Gandalf reached the door. The moment he crossed the threshold, the weight pressing against him vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. He stood in the hallway, his breathing steady but deep. His grip on the book was firm, though he could still feel its presence, lingering like a pulse beneath his fingertips. The darkness inside the room did not follow. It remained where it had been, trapped, raging in its own silence. But it would not rest. Not now. Gandalf cast one last glance over his shoulder. Then, with a word, he closed the door behind him. The tower remained quiet. But the battle was far from over. The corridors of Orthanc stretched in eerie silence as Gandalf descended from Saruman's former study, his steps echoing softly against the cold stone. The book weighed heavily in his hands, though he knew it was not the leather and parchment alone that burdened him. The knowledge within, dark, insidious, was something that should have perished with its master. And yet, it had endured. Gandalf's mind raced as he reached the great hall below. The presence in that chamber had been neither living nor dead. It was something in between, something lingering from an age that should have ended with Sauron's fall. But it had not. Whatever shadow had been left behind was still waiting. For what? Outside, the wind howled through the ruins of Isengard. The Ents had long since left this place, returning to their deep forests, leaving behind only a scattering of men to watch over the wreckage. Yet tonight, there was no one. The valley was empty. The absence of life pressed against Gandalf like an unseen weight. He reached the main entrance, where the heavy stone doors stood ajar, just as he had left them. Shadowfax, his faithful steed, waited a short distance away, ears pricked toward the tower, sensing something unnatural. Gandalf took a slow breath and stepped out into the night. But before he could mount his horse, the book trembled in his grasp. He froze. A pulse, like a heartbeat, throbbed through the ancient pages. Gandalf narrowed his eyes, adjusting his grip. The book had remained dormant within Orthanc for years, but now that it had been uncovered, had been touched, it was waking. He considered destroying it. A flame, a spell, a strike of his staff, and it could be reduced to ashes. But something told him that fire alone would not be enough. The words written within were more than mere ink. They carried something deeper, something woven with power beyond mortal understanding. And Gandalf could not destroy what he did not yet understand. He turned toward Shadowfax and was about to climb into the saddle when something stirred behind him. A whisper. It came not from the book, nor from the wind, but from within Orthanc itself. Gandalf turned sharply, staff raised. The darkness of the great hall loomed before him, the doorway gaping like the maw of some sleeping beast. The whisper had been faint, almost indistinguishable from the sigh of the wind, but he had heard it. Not a voice this time. Not a word. Just a breath. His eyes narrowed. Shadowfax let out a soft, uneasy snort. The horse pawed at the ground, urging him to leave. Gandalf hesitated only a moment longer before pulling himself into the saddle. He had seen enough for one night. Whatever remnants of Sauron's will still clung to this place, they would not be answered here, in the ruins of a dead tower. He needed counsel, wisdom beyond his own. He needed Rivendell. With a gentle nudge, Shadowfax turned, hoofs barely making a sound as they glided over the ruined stone paths of Isengard. The wind chased them, carrying with it the lingering echoes of Orthanc's past. But as they rode into the night, Gandalf did not notice the single, faint wisp of shadow that slipped from the cracks of the tower's walls, trailing behind them like a specter unseen. The journey north was swift. Shadowfax, the greatest of all horses, carried Gandalf across the lands with unmatched speed, their path cutting through forgotten roads and moonlit hills. The forests of Eriador stretched before them, dark and endless beneath the stars. The air was crisp, cool with the touch of autumn. Yet despite the beauty of the night, an unease coiled in Gandalf's mind. The book remained silent as they traveled, yet he could not shake the feeling that it was aware. That it was listening. By the time the peaks of the misty mountains loomed in the distance, the first light of dawn had begun to touch the horizon. And there, nestled between the slopes, lay Rivendell and Lodris, the last homely house east of the sea. Gandalf's shoulders eased slightly at the sight of it. Here, at least, there was wisdom beyond his own. As they descended toward the valley, the scent of pine and rushing water filled the air. The sound of waterfalls echoed gently through the cliffs, a soothing contrast to the quiet tension that had followed Gandalf since Orthanc. At the entrance, 2 elven sentinels stood waiting. Their silver armor gleamed in the morning light, their keen eyes watching as the wizard approached. "Hail, Mithrandir," one of them greeted, inclining his head. "You come at an early hour." "I bring matters of weight," Gandalf replied, sliding from Shadowfax's back. "I must see Lord Elrond." The elves exchanged a brief glance but did not question him. They stepped aside, allowing him to pass into the heart of Rivendell. Elrond awaited him in a great hall, standing by the open balcony that overlooked the valley. His long robes cascaded like flowing water, his dark hair unbound save for the delicate silver circlet resting on his brow. His sharp eyes studied Gandalf as he entered. "You come with unease," Elrond observed. Gandalf did not waste time. He stepped forward, unwrapping the book from the black cloth that had concealed it. Elrond's expression darkened the moment his gaze fell upon it. "This should not be," he murmured. "And yet, it is," Gandalf said gravely. "I found it hidden beneath Orthanc. Saruman kept it secret, even from his closest servants." Elrond reached out, but hesitated just before touching the cover, as if sensing the cold presence lingering upon it. He frowned. "This is not merely a record." "No," Gandalf agreed. "It is more." They moved to a table where they carefully laid the book down. The morning light from the balcony barely seemed to touch it, as though the darkness woven into its pages repelled even the sun. Elrond studied the cover, tracing a finger just above the surface without making contact. His expression grew troubled. "This is older than I had thought," he murmured. "Older than Sauron's dominion over Mordor." He looked up at Gandalf, eyes sharp. "Where did he find this?" "I do not yet know," Gandalf admitted. "But I fear it holds more than mere knowledge." Elrond's lips pressed into a thin line. He opened the book carefully, turning the pages with precise, deliberate movements. The Elvish lord was fluent in many tongues, even the black speech of Mordor, yet he read in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "This is not simply a record of Sauron's plans," he said. "It is a blueprint. A design for something that was never completed." Gandalf's fingers tightened on his staff. "A design for what?" Elrond turned another page, and for the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his ageless features. "A second forge," he said. "A way to create something even beyond the One Ring." The room seemed to darken, the very air growing heavy. Gandalf exhaled slowly. The implications were staggering. Sauron had planned for defeat. He had devised a means of returning, not just in shadow, but in power. And now that knowledge was in their hands. Gandalf knew only one thing for certain: this was not the end of Sauron's story. It was the beginning of something far worse. The hall was silent, save for the rustle of parchment as Elrond carefully turned another page of the ancient tome. The golden morning light streaming through the balcony seemed unable to touch the book, as if the darkness within repelled even the purest of elements. Gandalf watched intently, his sharp eyes scanning Elrond's face for any sign of recognition, any flicker of understanding that might illuminate what they had uncovered. Elrond's brow furrowed, his fingers hovering just above the inked script, careful not to touch the pages more than necessary. The air in the room had grown heavier since the book had been opened, as though the weight of history itself was pressing down upon them. "This is troubling," Elrond murmured at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "These writings, they speak of something far worse than I imagined." Gandalf leaned in slightly. "Worse than the One Ring?" Elrond did not answer immediately. He turned another page, then exhaled through his nose, his lips pressed in a tight line. "It is difficult to say. The One Ring was crafted to bind, to dominate. It was the key to Sauron's dominion. But this is different." He met Gandalf's gaze. "This is not about control. This is about permanence." Gandalf's frown deepened. "Permanence?" Elrond nodded. The One Ring was Sauron's anchor, the vessel into which he poured his essence. But even it could be destroyed, as we have seen. He gestured toward the book. This text speaks of something else. A design that would have ensured Sauron's existence beyond destruction. A way for him to return not just as a shadow, but as something immortal, beyond even the reach of the Vala. A cold shiver ran down Gandalf's spine. He had spent his long years battling Sauron's influence, ensuring that the Dark Lord's dominion would never rise again. And yet, as he stared at the worn pages before him, he realized that victory had never been as absolute as they had believed. Elrond continued, his voice steady but grim. It speaks of a forge, but not like the one in Mount Doom. This forge was never built, though the plans were laid. It would not have been used to craft a ring, but something else entirely, something referred to as Vathaduin. Gandalf's grip tightened around his staff. He had seen that word before, back in Orthanc, scrawled in Sauron's hand. What does it mean? Elrond shook his head. The translation is unclear. It is an ancient term, one that predates even the rise of Numenor. But from what I gather, it was meant to house something beyond physical form, an essence, a will. Gandalf inhaled slowly. A vessel? Elrond hesitated, then nodded. Yes. A vessel, but not in the way the One Ring was. The ring bound Sauron's spirit to Middle-earth, yes, but it was still tied to destruction. If the ring fell, so too did he. This, however, he gestured again at the book. This would have allowed him to transcend destruction entirely. To return without need of an anchor. Gandalf's mind raced. Sauron had always feared one thing above all, true annihilation. If these writings were to be believed, he had found a way to ensure that his fall would never be final. This forge, Gandalf's voice was low, wary. If it was never built, then the design remains unfinished. Elrond nodded. Correct. But therein lies the danger. He tapped the pages gently. The knowledge is still here. The process, the foundations, if someone with the right understanding were to continue this work, they could finish what Sauron started, Gandalf concluded darkly. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of a waterfall cascading beyond the balcony. Elrond closed the book carefully, his hands lingering on the worn leather cover. Saruman must have known, he said at last. If he kept this hidden, it was because he understood its significance. Perhaps he sought to use it for himself, or perhaps he feared what others might do with it. Gandalf exhaled, his gaze distant. He was a fool to think he could control such knowledge. He shook his head. And now it has passed to me. Elrond regarded him carefully. What will you do? Gandalf did not answer immediately. His mind was already working through the possibilities, weighing the risks. This was knowledge that should never be used, never be spoken of again. Yet, simply hiding it once more was not enough. If he had found it, others could as well. There is only one course, Gandalf said at last. This knowledge must be erased. Destroyed in its entirety. Elrond studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. I agree. But it will not be so simple. No, Gandalf admitted. It never is. He reached for the book again, his fingers brushing over its cover. The moment he touched it, A chill ran through him, not from the air, but from something within. It was as though the book itself resisted him, as though it knew. And then, a whisper. Soft, barely audible, yet unmistakable. You cannot undo what has already begun. Gandalf's breath caught, but he did not react otherwise. He only lifted the book, tucking it beneath his cloak as he turned toward Elrond. I must go, he said. Elrond raised an eyebrow. To where? Gandalf's eyes darkened. To the one place where things such as this can truly be destroyed. Elrond stiffened slightly. You mean? Yes, Gandalf confirmed. Mount Doom. Elrond was silent for a long moment. Then, with a solemn nod, he said, I will not try to dissuade you, Mithrandir, but tread carefully. Sauron's shadow may be gone, but his will lingers. Gandalf turned toward the balcony, where the morning sun now shone brighter, illuminating the valley of Rivendell in soft gold. Then it is time, he murmured, more to himself than to Elrond. Without another word, he strode toward the exit, the weight of the book pressing against him like a buried secret refusing to be forgotten. Far away, in the ruins of Isengard, a cold wind stirred. And deep beneath the ashes of Mordor, where no eyes could see, something shifted. The road to Mordor was long and treacherous, even with Shadowfax's speed. Gandalf rode hard through the ancient lands of Middle-earth, his mind burdened by the knowledge he now carried. The book, wrapped in thick cloth, was tucked securely within his robes, but its presence was an unshakable weight upon his soul. He could almost feel it pulsing, like a living thing resisting its own demise. He passed through the wilds of a region, his path cutting through forgotten ruins where echoes of a lost age whispered in the wind. The stars wheeled above him as night stretched its veil over the land, but Gandalf did not stop to rest. Time was against him. If what Elrond had read was true, then this book held the key to something far darker than even the One Ring, a means of returning Sauron to Middle-earth without the need for an anchor. And yet, the whispers haunted him still. Since leaving Rivendell, he had heard them, soft, distant, just on the edge of perception. They came not from the world around him, but from within the book itself. You cannot undo what has already begun. The words had followed him from Elrond's halls, creeping into his thoughts like a parasite. At first, he dismissed them as the remnants of some lingering spell, an echo of Sauron's will imprinted upon the pages. But the farther he rode, the clearer the whispers became. It was not merely an echo. It was something aware. Gandalf gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on his staff. He was no fool, he knew dark magic when he felt it. But even so, there was something different about this presence. It did not command, nor did it threaten. It warned. By the time he reached the borders of Rohan, the wind had begun to shift. Great storm clouds gathered in the distance, their dark shapes twisting above the eastern horizon. Gandalf urged Shadowfax forward, knowing that if he wished to reach Mordor before the storm broke, he would have to push on without delay. As he passed through the plains of the Riddermark, he noticed something strange. There were no travelers, no herdsmen tending to their flocks, no signs of life at all. The roads were empty, and the air was heavy with something unseen. The silence was unnatural. When he reached Edoras, the golden halls of Meduseld loomed above him, their banners fluttering listlessly in the still air. He did not intend to stop, but as he passed the gates, a voice called out, "Hail, Mithrandir!" Gandalf turned to see a rider approaching from the great hall, Eomer, King of Rohan. The warrior's face was shadowed with concern, and his hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Gandalf reigned in Shadowfax. "King Eomer," he greeted. "You look troubled." Eomer nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting something unseen to emerge. "Strange tidings have reached us, Gandalf," he said. "Dark shapes have been seen moving in the east, things that should not be." Gandalf's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" Eomer hesitated, then gestured for him to follow. "Come inside. There is something you must see." The great hall of Meduseld was dimly lit, the fire in the hearth casting flickering shadows upon the golden pillars. Eomer led Gandalf toward a side chamber where a wooden table had been cleared. Upon it lay a single object, an iron gauntlet, blackened and twisted, its metal warped as if by great heat. Gandalf frowned, stepping closer. "Where did this come from?" "A rider brought it from the eastern borders," Eomer said grimly. "It was found near the outskirts of Mordor." Gandalf reached out and hovered his hand over the gauntlet, feeling the air above it. Even without touching it, he could sense the remnants of dark magic, faint but present. "This is not Orcish craft," Gandalf murmured. "Nor is it the work of men." Eomer nodded. "It is unlike anything we have seen before. And it is not the only thing." He gestured toward a scout standing nearby. "Tell him what you told me." The scout stepped forward, his face pale. "I was patrolling the eastern roads, my lord, when I saw them, shadows moving in the dust. At first, I thought them to be mere tricks of the light, but then I heard whispers. Faint, as though carried on the wind." He swallowed. "They spoke of something returning." A chill ran through Gandalf. Eomer studied him closely. "Does this mean something to you, Mithrandir?" Gandalf did not answer immediately. His thoughts turned to the book hidden within his robes, its weight heavier than ever. He had intended to take it to Mount Doom and destroy it before it could fall into the wrong hands. But now he feared he had already been followed. "Sauron's will lingers," he said at last. "And I fear something has begun to stir in the ruins of his domain." Eomer's expression darkened. "Then you are riding into great danger." Gandalf sighed. It would not be the first time. The King of Rohan considered him for a moment, then straightened. "Then let me offer you an escort, 20 of my best riders. You should not make this journey alone." Gandalf shook his head. "No, Eomer. This task is mine alone." He glanced toward the storm clouds gathering in the east. "But if I do not return, know this, Middle-earth may not be rid of its darkness just yet." Eomer clenched his jaw but nodded. "Then ride swiftly, Gandalf. And may the Vala protect you." With that, Gandalf turned, striding out of the great hall. He had no more time to waste. The storm was coming, and if the whispers were true, then something else was coming with it. Something that should have never been awakened. As he rode once more toward Mordor, the land around him grew colder. The great plains of Rohan gave way to the broken lands of Gondor, and soon the barren wastes of the plateau of Gorgoroth stretched before him. Mount Doom loomed in the distance, its blackened peaks standing against the storm-lit sky like a wand upon the world. And as Gandalf approached the ruins of Barad-dûr, a voice, clearer now than ever before, whispered from the depths of the book. You are too late. Gandalf's heart pounded, and for the first time in centuries, a sliver of fear crept into his soul. Something had already begun. The air grew heavier as Gandalf crossed into Mordor, Shadowfax's hooves kicking up blackened dust as they sped across the barren wasteland. The ground beneath them was cracked and lifeless, a land still wounded by the destruction of Sauron's dominion. Though Barad-dûr had fallen, its ruins still loomed like a jagged scar upon the landscape. Mount Doom stood ahead, its peak shrouded in thick clouds, though no fire had burned within it since the One Ring was destroyed. And yet, as Gandalf rode closer, he could feel something unnatural stirring in the air, an unease that had nothing to do with old memories. The book beneath his robes had grown colder, its presence an almost physical weight against his chest. It had whispered to him for days, but now, as he neared his destination, it was silent. That silence was more unsettling than the whispers. A storm churned above him, deep purple and black clouds swirling as if drawn towards some unseen force. Lightning crackled in the distance, illuminating the twisted remnants of Sauron's fortress. Though the great tower had crumbled, its foundations still jutted out from the scorched ground, and there, at its heart, something waited. Gandalf brought Shadowfax to a stop at the foot of the ruins. He dismounted, staff in hand, eyes scanning the broken landscape. A deep unease gnawed at him. He had fought Sauron's darkness before, but this was different. This was something that had remained hidden, something unfinished. The moment his feet touched the ground, the wind died. A stillness settled over the ruins, as if the very world was holding its breath. Gandalf did not hesitate. He had come too far to turn back now. He stepped forward, treading carefully over the fallen stone and debris. The deeper he moved into the ruins, the colder the air became. A presence lingered here, unseen but undeniable. He could feel it watching him, pressing against him like an unseen force, waiting. And then, at the center of the ruins, he saw it. A blackened pedestal of obsidian, cracked but not destroyed. Upon it lay something ancient, an iron disc, covered in intricate runes, its surface dark and smooth like polished glass. It pulsed faintly, a rhythm too slow to be a heartbeat, too deliberate to be mere coincidence. Thathaduin. The word from the book rang in Gandalf's mind like a distant echo. He stepped closer, his grip tightening on his staff. This was what Sauron had been working toward. Not a ring, not a weapon of war, but something deeper. Something meant to outlast even the destruction of his physical form. A vessel. A means to return, not bound by a single object, but by the very fabric of the world itself. Gandalf reached into his robe and pulled out the book. He had carried it all this way, determined to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. But as he held it now, standing before this forgotten artifact, he realized the truth. The book was not just a record of Sauron's unfinished design. It was a part of it. The whispers had not been warnings. They had been guiding him. A sharp wind howled through the ruins, and as Gandalf stepped closer to the pedestal, the book reacted. The pages curled slightly as if drawn toward the iron disc, the ink shifting upon the parchment as though something within the words was alive. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed from the depths of the ruins. "You have brought it home." Gandalf's breath caught. He turned sharply, staff raised, but there was no one there. The shadows stretched unnaturally around him, flickering like they were moving on their own. The voice came again, this time from within his own mind. Did you think my fall would be so complete? Gandalf clenched his jaw, his grip on his staff unwavering. Sauron, he said coldly. A low, almost amused chuckle echoed in the air. You have carried my final piece across Middle-earth, thinking yourself its destroyer. But you are the vessel, Gandalf the Grey. You have done what my servants could not. You have brought me back to the place of my rebirth. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. Your power was undone. Your ring destroyed. You have no dominion here. The shadows around him trembled. You think power lies only in the ring? Fool. I am bound to no single thing. I am the will that shapes the world, the hand that bends all to its design. You have carried my knowledge, my voice, my will, and now you stand upon the threshold of my return. The iron disc on the pedestal pulsed, and suddenly the ruins around Gandalf shifted. The stones trembled, the air thickened, and in the distance, the storm above Mount Doom roared to life. Gandalf had seconds to act. He gritted his teeth, raising his staff. I will not be your pawn. You already are. A gust of black wind surged from the pedestal, striking him like a hammer. Gandalf staggered back, gripping his staff tightly as the force of it threatened to drive him to his knees. The whispers became a chorus, voices from the darkness rising in unison, pulling at his thoughts, his will. But he was no ordinary man, no mere servant of the Vala. He was Gandalf the White, reborn in the light of the West. He resisted. Summoning every ounce of his power, he slammed the base of his staff into the ground. A burst of white light exploded outward, shattering the dark wind and breaking the whispers into fragmented echoes. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the crevices of the ruins. The iron disc cracked. The pulsing stopped. A final, enraged whisper hissed through the air. This is not the end. The book in Gandalf's hands shuddered violently, then burst into flames. The fire was pure and white, consuming the pages without smoke, without ash. The cursed text burned away, its secrets lost forever. And then, silence. The storm above Mordor began to break. The unnatural weight in the air lifted. The ruins of Barad-dûr, once suffocating with unseen presence, now felt empty. Gandalf exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping with the weight of what had just transpired. He stepped forward, raising his staff once more, and with a final command of light, he shattered the iron disc beneath his foot. The darkness did not fight back this time. It was over. For now. Gandalf turned away from the ruins, mounting Shadowfax once more. The book was gone, its knowledge erased. The last remnants of Sauron's unfinished design had been destroyed. But as he rode away from Mordor, he could not shake the feeling that something had lingered. Something had watched him. And far, far away, beyond the reach of light, a shadow stirred. The ride away from Mordor was eerily silent. Shadowfax moved swiftly across the blackened plains, but even the wind seemed subdued, as though the land itself was hesitant to acknowledge what had just transpired. Gandalf had destroyed the iron disc and burned Sauron's final record of his unfinished designs, yet an unsettling presence still lingered at the edges of his senses. The remnants of Barad-dûr were empty now, truly empty, but that was what disturbed him most. There was no lingering malevolence, no final struggle of a defeated will. It was as though something had chosen to retreat rather than be destroyed. and that was what worried him. As Gandalf rode westward, the sky above Mordor slowly began to clear. The storm that had gathered around Mount Doom was dissipating, the unnatural pressure fading with it. By the time he reached the desolate lands bordering Ithilien, the first traces of dawn were breaking over the eastern horizon. Still, he did not slow. He had to reach Minas Tirith. By midday, the White City came into view. Its gleaming walls, once battered by the siege of Sauron's forces, stood strong once more, a beacon of hope in the lands of men. The banners of Gondor flew high, rippling in the wind, and the 7 levels of the city bustled with life. Yet, as Gandalf approached, a sense of unease settled in his chest. He had expected relief upon returning to familiar ground, but instead, the whisper of uncertainty remained. He rode through the gates without hesitation, Shadowfax's arrival drawing the attention of the guards. Murmurs spread quickly, Mithrandir had returned, and from the east no less. The city had long since known peace, but the sight of the grey pilgrim, now the white, returning from the lands of shadow was enough to make even the boldest men uneasy. A steward quickly escorted him to the citadel, where King Aragorn awaited. Aragorn sat upon the throne of Gondor, but the moment Gandalf entered, he rose, his sharp eyes scanning the wizard's face. He could see it immediately. Trouble had followed Gandalf home. Mithrandir, Aragorn greeted, stepping down from the dais. Your return is unexpected, though I fear not without purpose. Gandalf inclined his head. Indeed, there is much we must speak of. The king motioned for the chamber to be cleared, and within moments, only a few trusted figures remained. Legolas, standing silently near one of the tall windows, his keen elven senses attuned to every shift in the air. Gimli, seated in a stone chair, arms crossed as he studied Gandalf with a knowing gaze, and Faramir, now steward of Gondor, his expression thoughtful and serious. Aragorn gestured toward a smaller, more private table. Come, my friend. Sit, and tell us what has transpired. Gandalf took his seat, but did not yet relax. He unfastened his cloak, allowing it to drape over the chair, then leaned forward, resting both hands atop his staff. He met Aragorn's gaze, then the others. I have been to Orthanc, he began. A shadow flickered across Aragorn's face. He had long suspected that the ruined tower still harbored secrets. And what did you find? Gandalf's expression darkened. Something that should have remained buried. He spoke then, recounting all that had happened, the discovery of the hidden chamber within Orthanc, the cursed book detailing Sauron's true plan, the iron disc within the ruins of Barad-dûr, and the voice that had spoken to him in the shadows. The room grew deathly silent. Even Gimli, who often scoffed at matters of magic, remained tense, his brow furrowed deeply. When Gandalf finished, Aragorn exhaled, his fingers pressing against his temples. This is dire. Legolas, who had remained silent throughout the telling, finally spoke. And you are certain the book is truly destroyed? Gandalf nodded, burned in a fire of pure light. Its knowledge is lost. But the voice you heard, Faramir said carefully. If Sauron is truly gone, then what was it? Gandalf's jaw tightened. That is what troubles me. It was not merely an echo, nor a lingering curse. It was aware. It was waiting. Gimli let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his beard. So what you're saying is that we've spent all these years believing the Dark Lord was gone, only for some piece of him to slink away and hide? Not quite, Gandalf said. The design Sauron left behind suggests he was trying to create a means of return, not through the ring, not through a physical vessel, but through a will that could persist beyond destruction. If he had succeeded, he would have become something even more terrible than before. Aragorn's expression hardened, but he did not succeed. No, Gandalf admitted, but he came close. Silence fell once more. Then Legolas shifted. His sharp elven gaze was focused on something unseen, his posture subtly rigid. There is something else, isn't there? He asked quietly. Gandalf hesitated only a moment before speaking. When I left the ruins of Barad-dûr, I did not feel like I had one. There was no great struggle for dominance, no final act of defiance. The darkness simply, he exhaled, retreated. Aragorn frowned, as if waiting for another chance. Yes. The King of Gondor stood, pacing toward the high windows overlooking the city. He remained quiet for a long moment before speaking. If Sauron's remnants still linger, if his will still seeks a way to manifest, then what must be done? Gandalf's eyes flickered toward Mount Doom, visible even from this great distance. We must be vigilant, he said. The One Ring is gone, and Sauron's form was broken beyond repair. He has no physical anchor. But that does not mean he is incapable of returning in another way. Gimli scowled. And how exactly do we fight something that doesn't have a body? Gandalf's gaze turned to him, grim and unwavering. We do what we have always done. We stand against it. We do not allow it to find new roots. We do not allow its whispers to reach the hearts of men. Aragorn turned back to them, his expression resolute. Then we must ensure Middle-earth remains a land where such shadows find no purchase. Gandalf nodded. Indeed. And I will not rest until I know for certain that Sauron's will has been utterly extinguished. A weight settled over them all, but in that moment, a determination also took hold. The war had ended years ago, but the struggle against darkness was never truly over. And far beyond the walls of Minas Tirith, in a place where no light reached, something watched. Something waited. The white city stood tall beneath the starlit sky, its towers gleaming like silver against the dark expanse. A cool breeze drifted through the high halls of the citadel, whispering through the stone corridors where the king and his closest allies sat in council. Though their discussion had ended hours ago, Gandalf remained seated, lost in thought. His staff rested against the polished floor, his fingers loosely gripping its worn surface. The weight of the journey he had undertaken, the revelations he had unearthed, pressed upon him. Sauron had failed in his final gambit, but there was no true sense of victory. The enemy had not fought him for possession of the Iron Disc. It had simply waited, and that troubled him more than anything. A hand rested lightly on his shoulder. He turned to see Aragorn standing beside him, his expression calm but knowing. You have been silent for too long, my friend, the king said. Your mind lingers in places your body has already left. Gandalf exhaled, rubbing his forehead. It is difficult to walk away from what I have seen. The shadows of the past have a way of reaching forward, even when we believe they are gone. Aragorn nodded, understanding. Even after the ring was destroyed, I would wake at night, wondering if some fragment of the Dark Lord remained, wondering if the war had truly ended. Gandalf studied him for a long moment. "And do you still wonder?" Aragorn was quiet for a time, then said, "No, because I choose to believe in what we have built since that time. I do not ignore the past, but I do not let it rule the present." The wizard smiled faintly, but the concern in his eyes did not fade. Spoken like a true king, Aragorn gave a small chuckle. "I learned from the best." Gimli, who had been dozing in his chair nearby, let out a loud snort and opened one eye. "If you two are finished with your poetic speeches, I'd like to remind you both that a good night's sleep is the best way to stop brooding over problems that can't be solved in a single evening." Gandalf chuckled. "A wise suggestion, Master Dwarf." Legolas, standing near the window, turned toward them. His gaze, ever watchful, held a strange glint of certainty. "The darkness may never be fully erased from the world," he said, "but it is not the only thing that lingers. Light remains as well." Gandalf inclined his head. "That is why we must ensure that the light is always stronger." The next morning, Gandalf prepared to depart. The road called to him still, though he knew this journey was nearing its true end. He had returned the knowledge of Sauron's final designs to the earth, and though questions remained, he had done what he had set out to do. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Faramir stood with him at the gates of Minas Tirith as he mounted Shadowfax. The great horse, ever loyal, moved with an almost eager energy, sensing the road ahead. "Where will you go now?" Aragorn asked. "To Rivendell," Gandalf replied. "There are those who should know what has transpired. And beyond that, perhaps the West." A knowing silence settled between them. The time of the Astari in Middle-earth was nearly over. He had lingered longer than he had intended, but now, at last, the road home stretched before him. "Then let this not be farewell," Aragorn said, "but until we meet again." Gandalf smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "Until we meet again." He urged Shadowfax forward, and as he rode away from the White City, the sun rose in the east, casting golden light upon the walls. The shadows that had once loomed over Middle-earth had been driven back once more, and though darkness would always seek a way to return, so too would those who stood against it. And as long as there were those who held to the light, the world would never fall. Far beyond Gondor, deep within the unseen corners of the world, something stirred. The remnants of a broken will, shattered but not wholly destroyed. The whispers that had filled Gandalf's mind had been silenced, but only for a time. The Dark Lord was gone, but the memory of him remained, and memories had a way of finding new forms. For now, the world was safe. The shadows had retreated, but in the distant reaches of time, the question would rise again. Can darkness ever truly be destroyed? Only time would tell. The end. And so, the tale comes to an end. The shadows have faded, the journey has been taken, and the mysteries of Orthanc now rest in the past. Gandalf rides into the dawn, leaving behind the echoes of darkness and carrying with him the quiet wisdom of all he has seen. Let your mind drift, like the mist over the mountains, slowly dissolving into the warmth of the rising sun. The world is at peace, for now, and you too can rest, knowing that light will always return. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and surrender to sleep. The story may be over, but dreams still await, ready to carry you to distant lands once more.